Welcome to the Talking Transformation podcast, presented to you from the Western Cape Pod Bunker, located here in the heart of Cape Town, South Africa. This pod is presented to provide a platform and a voice for built environment professionals and interest groups who are working towards transforming the places and spaces here in South Africa. It is dedicated to those individuals and community groups that are supporting both the formal and informal processes that are shaping our cities and our spaces. It's the night before I go through to Port Elizabeth, and during the course of the weekend I'm going to be meeting up with Lance del Monte. I've known Lance since about 2003 or 4, and I first came across his work and that of the General Motors or Delta Foundation as it was, and the work that they were doing in the middle to high density subsidised housing. And those of you who are familiar with Missionvale and Sakasonke, which were two of the formative projects there in Port Elizabeth, will be very familiar with the techniques and the approach that they used, and they became sort of award-winning as well as widely replicated. The important thing with Lance and the team that he worked with, and what we're going to hear from him, is the fact that each and every project that was developed had a lesson to be learned and a scale to be replicated. And they've looked at pretty much every single subsidy regime or grant that's available, whether it was the finance-linked institutional subsidy, the FLISP as it's known, the social housing, they've used that. They've used the RDP, IRDP grant. They've pretty much covered all the bases. What I have tried through the various discussions with Lance in over these last 15 years or so has been to try and understand how can we replicate at scale in other of the metros, the lessons learned, the designs, the approaches. And it's always struck me that we often get caught up in some of the, the routine. There are examples all over the country of really good, well-designed housing spaces. I think where Lance and the team have really been able to succeed is they just keep on doing it. They keep on finding ways for infill housing. They keep finding ways for dealing with, the differentiated grant regimes and making it work within that envelope. So he's got lots and lots of lessons for us to think about, and I think it's going to stimulate quite a lot of interest and response. So please think about how we can continue the discussion after you've heard from Lance del Monte. Today we've travelled east. We're in the Eastern Cape. We're in Port Elizabeth, and I'm absolutely delighted to be sitting across the table from Lance del Monte. Lance, I think you and I have known each other for 15 years, maybe even coming up to 20.
I think it's the start of Sakasonke village when you came down to
Johannesburg. It was exactly that. So it was definitely in the early 2000s, Lance. And
what happened to all those people? I mean,
well, that's another conversation for another day. And good question.
Yes.
So absolutely delighted to be here, and thank you very much for taking time out of your...
Welcome to the friendly city.
Indeed, it's good to be back in the friendly city, a very special city for me, given that I have family here too.
Yeah.
So really I'd wanted us to come here, Lance. I think you've been an inspiration to myself and many of my colleagues for many years, given the work that you've done on human settlement initiatives here in Port Elizabeth. You've demonstrated time after time the ability to, in spite of the housing policy, in spite of the housing subsidy regime, to be able to continue to deliver in a number of different products, different grant regimes, and you've really shown us how to do it, and not coming with the arguments of why it can't be done.
Yeah.
So really it was to tap you for your information and to record it and have it there in the podcast for people to come into and say, well, why can't we upscale? Why can't we demonstrate the same way that PEs has done? So I'm going to ask you to take us back to Missionvale, which to my mind was the start of a very exciting approach to medium to high density housing. Let's talk a bit about Missionvale and where it started.
Yeah. We started that in 1995. It was an initiative of the then Delta Foundation, which became the General Motors South Africa Foundation. Missionvale really originated in the way in which housing was being, government subsidised housing was being produced, and how that became the sort of paradigm for the way in which housing, and particularly subsidised housing, RDP, reconstruction and development housing, was being supplied after 1994. And it had its the genesis of that was in the Matchbox House, or the so-called Matchbox House, that was rolled out in mass prior to 94, mostly from the late 50s, and ironically had its origins in a doctoral thesis that was produced by somebody called D.M. Calderwood. A thesis was written and it was about public, I think it was called, this is refer here, public sector, native housing in South Africa by D.M. Calderwood, was part of a doctoral thesis that was done by him, trying to establish a sort of a stereotype for housing, subsidized housing in South Africa that was going to be rolled out in the in the group areas and later in the African townships, designed as a freestanding, it's called a 51/9, 51 square meter house. Version 9, I suppose, was a freestanding house, and this was 2 bedrooms, and this this was rolled out in mass at a very low density in dormitory towns, far from places of work and an opportunity, and became the blueprint for housing, and settlements, which were dictated in those days, and they still are to a very large extent, by civil engineering. The straight roads were cheaper, and the mid blocks had to be straight, and therefore the settlements that emerged from that were largely, lacked the identity and sense of place that we're now trying to achieve, and of course just a rollout of residential development without too much social facilities. So it became a one-size-fits-all, and unfortunately, this became the paradigm for the post-94 RDP housing for the very poor, the subsidised housing. Once again at low density, sprawled, etc. And
poor location, cheap land.
Poor, exactly. All of that, once again, ironically, repeated itself. And that, we wanted to, and that's where it started. We wanted to challenge that. We wanted to say, look, this can't be the answer to human settlement, as it was later to be called. We needed to challenge that, but in order to do that, we needed to produce some sort of example of how we would deviate from that. And Missionvale was the first one where we started looking at higher density. But not only the physical stuff, also the processes involved, because at that point, government is very much product orientated. We're going to produce this unit, it's going to be the answer to the maiden's prayer. Once we've done it, we'll move away and we'll move on to the next one. And you know what? I think there's a cliche that says that housing isn't about houses. It's about processes to get to housing. And we started looking at how do we involve people in the construction of the houses. How do we sort of extract as much as we can from the subsidy, not in only producing a shelter, a roof, but also putting back some of the investment into the community. So that gave, it was very idealistic. We were like dreamers and said, okay, we're going to do this. A lot of, and I'm going to touch on that later, a lot of people, because there's a question about, what inspired you. But a lot of people said we could never do it, it's not going to work. And we said, well, watch us, we're going to do it. And we got support from the then Department of Housing. They gave us subsidies, and then we started Missionvale. And that took some time. The idea was to have a replicable model, to bring people there, to learn from the experience, both the negative and the positive, and we were going to write this all up, which we did. We invited people to come and look, in situ, and yeah, it became quite a well-known deviation from, but not fully accepted because of the higher density and this expectation that housing can only be a freestanding house, 40 square meters, 2-bedroom on a subdivisible stand that you could walk around, and that was that, and that we were going to roll that out, and that it was a difficult sell in the beginning. We persevered, and I think that was the start of the process, and it did start in Missionvale, as you quite rightly said.
Thanks for that, Lance. I think it really sets the scene quite well. You've given us the heads up on Missionvale and how that the idea of trying to look at a differentiated type and approach. The numbers-driven game was only ever going to deliver a particular product, and I think any number of towns, cities or villages across the country will show you the representation of that in space. But I mean, maybe one of the other benefits in those early days, as I remember in discussing with you, is that the work or this collaboration with the General Motors or the Delta Foundation, as it were, that seemed to have played a very important role in giving you a chance to maybe demonstrate that it could be done differently. Maybe just a word on Delta and the General Motors Foundation.
I think
approach.
The GM Foundation, I'm going to call it the GM Foundation because it wasn't Delta Foundation for too long, because when South Africa became a democracy in 1994, they GM came back to South Africa under GM and left again in 2018. But in those early days, it was headed up by Roger Matlock, who is a maverick. He's one of the few civil engineers I know that has a social conscience, and that is. And I'm sorry, engineers are great at what they do, but he had a sense of humanity, and he gave me enormous freedom to experiment. And I think there's so many lessons in this, experimentation. We don't experiment enough. We're too scared to experiment. And he gave me all that latitude. And again, wanted to create these models. I think, again, idealistically, we wanted to try and distribute them to other, for free, write it all up, distribute them to other housing delivery agents. And they funded a lot of the R&D, research and development, and provided guarantees and the sort of backup to confidently approach funders like the Department of Human Settlements at the time, the Department of Housing, and others to provide. And by the way, in 1994, it was only RDP houses. They had not expanded it to the social housing.
Social housing was still on the horizon, right?
That instrument was still 10, 15 years away. And also the FLISP, Finance Linked Individual Subsidy Program, was also far away. So we were working in the RDP because that's all there was. And I was also lucky enough to visit places in Latin America. I went to Latin America 2 or 3 times, visiting Bolivia, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and virtually stole. You steal with your eyes. You pick up ideas, you get inspired, because others, you find out quite soon that others are in the same boat as you. Poverty responds in exactly the same way, whether you're in Brazil, in the favela, or whether you're in Soweto-on-Sea in Port Elizabeth. The response to poverty is exactly the same. They might have different ways of dealing with it. And I found Brazil had very pragmatic ways of dealing with what we saw and what we were shown. And that was inspirational to me. Come back and try and repackage some of the ideas and apply them to our unique situation. And of course, the uniqueness is not only between countries, it's between towns, and even between suburbs. People respond differently. So that was that was where, GM gave me a lot of space to move and to look and to, they believed in me. I don't know, some reason why, but I think we spoke the same language. And Roger, I think we were very similar and also very different. Roger was quite a maverick.
Maverick would certainly be a word that springs to mind.
And liked to push buttons, but in a nice way. And I think that's where where the role was. Obviously, also the funding and it was an interesting relationship, because I always thought, housing is quite a risky business for a company, a corporation like General Motors. Sure. The kind of stuff we were doing could blow up in our faces and land up on, literally land up on the shop floor, in GM. And it was
being such a big employer, I mean, massive reputational issue.
Absolutely, and can you imagine? I mean, housing being so politicized and so sensitive, and we were so close to it that we could, if we did something wrong, it could land up in the newspapers and get out there, and the whole thing would be scuppered, and we'd land up with egg on our faces, literally. But you know what, we got through that, and I think we managed to manage the little bit of flack that did come from it. It was part of the risk.
And if I remember correctly, Lance, just to be clear, I mean, this wasn't about General Motors getting housing for their employees.
No, it never was. That was very clear.
Very clear, correct.
Very clear about
social responsibility.
It was more of the corporate social responsibility, and I think they got a lot of mileage out of it, in that they were seen to be doing something for the community at large, and not just for their own employees, which they could have done. And I think it would have been a lot less valuable to us, because it would have been so focused and so narrow that we wouldn't have been able to go into all these places we went, and therein also lies a lesson for big corporations to also be a little brave, take a risk, and don't just go into the easy stuff like giving money to a good cause. This wasn't giving money to a good cause. This was seriously risky stuff we were going into here. So I think GM, through Roger, I think he filtered a lot as well. I mean, he protected the trustees he had a board of trustees that he was responsible to. I think he protected them a lot. Didn't lie to them, but just was selective in what he told them, not to unnerve them.
The consummate maverick politician, in that corporate space.
Yes, and he was good at that. He really was.
So let's broaden it again. So the Missionvale approach was upscaled significantly, as recollection goes, around Sakasonke.
Yes.
And I mean, Delta played a big role in coming in, to assist with the auctioneering of some land. And maybe let's move into that Sakasonke location.
So we sort of reflected on Missionvale. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? And after I came back from therapy, I mean, I'm joking, we decided that we needed to repeat it, in a better form. We had learned quite a lot from Missionvale. We'd written up. We were quite open about the mistakes we made, because you also learn from the mistakes, and it's not just the successes. And then Missionvale came about, and we were looking for a piece of land that was well located, and this caravan park came up, and the owners were in really dire straits, and it was offered on an auction, and we went, and nobody. It was too close to the township, but it was also very close to Walmer, the established, let's call it the old established group area, and we bought it. And I mean, we couldn't have bought it. I mean, GM Foundation had the money and said, "Yeah, go for it. Let's go and buy it. That's our new project," and that was the start of Sakasonke Village. It had some infrastructure on it that we used. There was an old ablution facility we turned into a community centre. It was a big ablution facility. and also a creche, and later became it was first the storeroom, and it morphed into so many things over the duration, of the project. But yeah, there were lots of lessons I think we learned there. I think there was a lot of skilling of the local community. It was the first time I had contact with SMMEs in the and then lies another story that would morph into something more benevolent, which I'll touch on later. But at that stage, we had small builders from the community that we trained up at the East Cape Training Centre, which was a training centre up to, doesn't exist anymore. That needed. We needed to show them that we could re-employ people, and they would train them in things like carpentry and all that stuff. And it was a very, very good synergy between the two organisations. We had looked at women in construction, and they were that's a whole issue for another day. I can talk long and hard about that. We looked at alternative construction methods. There was a house built out of wire called wire wall. There was another one, I don't know if you know Muladi. We tried to encourage this Muladi system, which is a system using plastic shuttering into which you throw concrete. But most of it was built conventionally out of blocks.
Lance, correct me if I'm wrong. You talked about the time in South America and some of the favelas and so forth.
Yes.
Didn't you bring in some material from South America because of the economy of scale of actually bringing in from overseas? I think it was the panel board.
It was the board. It was the shutter ply board we used for the second floor. We had to import because it was much cheaper.
There you go.
So, and we could import a whole container load of it, and it came from Latin America. It was that was like 15 years ago. And now you think about where that board comes from, the Amazon forest. Maybe we'd be a little bit more circumspect.
So there's a bit of social responsibility gone wrong there. But
there's so many pitfalls in housing.
The ambition was noble. The execution and circumstance. There was the double story issue. There was the trade-off of density. That was very much the people were still worried about this double story, semi-detached, higher density, as opposed to what I described earlier on, the freestanding house. And what we did was we used subsidy in such a way that the smaller earth and the higher density gave rise to much cheaper engineering service costs. And the balance of that we used in the house. So we could, through density, and the advantage of cheaper service engineering, we could then boost the size of the house, and we got houses of up to 46, I think even 48 square meter, which was unheard of. 40 was the minimum at that point, and the maximum. And we managed to go up to 46 because of density and because of the tightness of the development. It was a very highly pedestrianised development. We had places where cars could come in, but the car population was about 5-10%. And it was also on a very good transportation route, taxi route. So it was close to amenities, so it played into all of that. And there were issues of matching the labour. Remember, that was also very important. The building had to be reasonably unsophisticated in its design to allow low-level skilled labour to be involved, the SMMEs and people coming in. So that was a lesson in that, and the issue of wastage. We tried to design the house around standard lengths of material, and so there was a lot inherent in that whole project that was good, and it was a great deal more successful than Missionvale. We were kind of feeling in the dark. Maybe just before we get into the discussion on the on some of the job skilling and so forth, one of the things I wanted to touch on was how are you dealing with expectation. it's an interesting that you say, if you're looking at the form of the old style house, one earth, one unit, single story, low density. And if we're now looking at Sakasonke or Missionvale, what we're typically looking at is a 2-story, maybe quad, 4 units in one
these were
on
like
one
2
earth,
and 3
or two and three in a row.
3, I think.
What do people expect? What is the deal within the whole land and housing space? So in terms of the beneficiaries from Sakasonke, we're going to talk about that a bit more just now, but how do you deal with that expectation of, I want a single house with a single stand and that's how it's going to be, versus this, look, I'm getting something different, and there's going to be a common wall with a neighbour, at least on one side, if not 2 or 3.
We overcame that by building 1 or 2 show houses, and people were never forced to go there. It wasn't sort of a waiting list. We developed a waiting list after they were given the opportunity to view the houses. Climb the staircase. I mean, if you're old and infirm, I'm not going to be able to get up a staircase. But climb a staircase. See if this suits you. If it doesn't, well then
this is not necessarily
it's not for you. And we had a lot of people that were prepared to trade off the bigger stand and far away from home, which the whole opportunity cost issue came into it as well, because a lot of the people that and I know I'm diverting from it came from out of town, from New Brighton, Motherwell, which on the outskirts. Got quite a lot of them in,
far. And
they weren't then using 2 buses to get to work and 2 buses to get back home at night, and getting up at 5 in the morning to get to work at 7.
A major change in their lifestyle.
And a huge change, not only lifestyle but quality of life. More time with their family, less exhaustion, less money on. A big problem is that a lot of the disposable income of these folk gets spent on transport, and we found that up to 30-40, it wasn't unheard of, 30-40% of the disposable income would be spent on getting to and from work. So if you eliminated that, you had no additional money that you could spend on something else. And it's a no-brainer, basically. Density and positioning and of the.
Yet it's been such a challenge across the country. It remains.
We get into that. You asked the question. I can tell you why. I mean, from my point of view, why.
Well, I mean, let's deal with it. Why is it that? Why is that the lessons learned are not become the norm?
I think it was. I think it's political will. There's lack of education. People don't understand the trade-offs. There's a lot of filtering, filtering through leaders that will say, look, this is not for my community, so the information is never fed back, or they're never given an opportunity to decide for themselves, because it also has the effect of undermining the
established leadership in status quo.
Exactly. So let's just keep them, let's keep them away from this, because this is going to open up a whole can of worms, and will undermine my leadership. So, because the leadership is uninformed, has hidden agendas, or is not strong enough to say, I like this. Let's get the communities in, and let's see if they if they would take this up as an alternative. So there are a lot of reasons. The local authorities don't have standards. These standards are the old engineering standards. 12 by 20 site, 40 square meter house, thank you very much, there you go. And to challenge that is very, very difficult. But even with the officialdom, it's a whole lot of, it's multi-layered. It's attitudinal change. It's officials that don't push the idea, and the officials that do push the idea, but then the politicians don't buy it. It's a whole myriad of things. And I think the social housing movement in this country has changed that quite a lot. In that now, and I'm digressing, but we're seeing typologies, multi-story typologies, where people are living, renting, and we're even moving towards multi-story typologies where people can own under sectional title. So, we've come quite a long way from those days where it was only the
one size will fit all, not
bums on seats,
sure.
Quantity above quality. Okay, it was never above quality, but I think quality was was sacrificed for just putting as many in, and the statistic of how many people were housed. I mean, we were later on, 10 years later, the whole rectification process, the government spent an inordinate amount on rectification, billions. They'd already spent billions on the RDP program, and they spent billions more on rectification. But there were other reasons why that happened. I mean, just bad building management. People who had no track record were given contracts, and contracts were given because we know the other reasons. So, it was a mess in the end. And
it's really interesting hearing you reflect on those reasons, and the political will being one of them. In your experience, Lance, I mean, the whole question of NIMBY, or not in my backyard, that seems to be particularly prevalent in other of the cities, certainly within which I've worked. Just maybe a take on NIMBY, and from an anecdote, let me put this to you. When the Walmer estate, which was one of the next projects that we may talk about, was developed, it was just around the corner from let's say one of my family members, who is probably more on the NIMBY camp than this is great news that affordable housing is coming into my... And when this individual from my family said, I'm really happy with this sort of housing, that to me is where it was a defining moment. If you can convince somebody by design and quality and that it looks right, it's less about who is going in there and what their racial or income profile, and it's
to do with the optics of it.
You're all welcome in this space. There's an aesthetic to this.
Yes, there is an aesthetic.
So maybe a discussion.
And I think if I go back to the whole idea of creating a real life project that people could visit and say, well, this is not too bad. We can deal with this. From the RDP, we went to the Walmer Link. I don't know if you saw it, but it's a combination of FLISP and social housing,
the full range,
and affordable housing, all sort of mixed into one. And we received fantastic response. Not that we were, I mean, it was a good additional, accolade, I suppose, from the establishment that stayed around it. We never ever got a negative response from them, and in fact we got the reverse, because they could go and see it, and they could go and touch feel, and they didn't feel threatened by this thing we were bringing in, because a lot of it was about, you're bringing in people that are going to disrupt our environment, you're bringing in low class and so on. It was about a class thing in the end, really about colour.
Some people say it's about property dynamics, and this idea you're going to put cheap housing next to expensive, and it's going to distort the market.
I think there is a strong element of that's often held out as an excuse to exclude.
When in fact, it's a certain research shows that it can actually be the opposite.
Sure, and it can be the opposite. I think we've created quite a lot of stability in that part of Walmer because of the project and because of our interventions there, and it's a very stable community there, and Walmer Link itself, its stability has led to, and the reason it was called Walmer Link was to link with the established Walmer, which is a high-end development. It's quite, and this was going to be the link, and it's worked very, very well. I think we've never ever had any negative response to what we've done there, and people have just said, "Jeepers, we need more of it," and I think that's very encouraging. Largely overcome by creating these pockets, these, and again, they shouldn't be pockets. They should be big, infill, solid. But unfortunately, that's where we are. That's the scale we have at the moment. But at least it's something to go to, and to look at, and to say, maybe we can shape our city in this way.
If I take you back to the days of a Missionvale, a Sakasonke, a Walmer estate, public participation. So here we are. You've talked about what did they look like? What were those meetings? What were some of the issues that design charrettes and exciting?
Missionvale was, because you have you have a huge demand and you have very small supply. You have a limited supply. You only get so much money. We built 500 and 498 units at Missionvale, and we had a huge informal settlement, most of whom qualified. And that's where we went a little wrong with the beneficiary selection. It was an abjectly poor community, and it was our first project, and we were thinking, we've got to help the abjectly poor first. That was our response. And it was, we learned the lesson that you should actually mix within the income group. You should have people that earn more, and you should have, maybe the majority earn on the downside, but you should also mix it. We didn't mix it. We just took and most of them fell way under the maximum. And there was a lot of conflict around that too. And I can tell you stories about, used to get into physical arguments about who was going to be selected and why were they selected and we were not selected. And
difficult conversations. Really
difficult social dynamics there. We learnt a lot of lessons, and in Sakasonke we decided to get Clive Felix. You may have heard of him. He headed up the Urban Services Group, which is like the DAG.
We know the DAG.
DAG in Cape Town, and it was Built Environment Support Group, BSG, I think they were in Johannesburg. We got the equivalent here of Urban Services Group involved. Clive Felix, who also a great guy who I have a lot of respect for, and you asked me who's influenced you, and probably one of them, Roger and him, would probably stand out as the two. He was responsible for his organisation helped us select in Sakasonke.
Right.
And there were, things like what resources they had. We went much deeper into the family environment and how can I put it? There was more. I wouldn't say interrogation. That's perhaps the wrong word, but getting to to the core of the family, and if they were worthy of and then also taking people at the higher end of the income band. And remember, the income band had gone up to 3, and it's have stayed there, 3,500. It was 1,500 when we did. That was the top end.
Can you believe it? Yeah.
RDP. And we took everybody sort of up to 750, and it was really the grindingly poor people.
Sure.
That was wrong. Not wrong.
It was well-intentioned, but it had a particular outcome at the end of the day.
Unintended consequences came out of that, because we basically transplanted poverty and social degradation too. And that, I'd say that wasn't one of the big successes of Missionvale, was the mix. And you can see that with Walmer Link now. Walmer Link has got a much greater range of people, right from those earning 2,500 who are renting, right up to 20 people earning 22,000 and beyond, who own houses and rent. So, and they've increased all the income bands. So there's a richer mix of people, and that, I think, to a large extent leads to much greater stability, other than just transporting poverty and transplanting it somewhere else. That was the failing of Missionvale.
So if there's a word that's coming out of sort of a lesson learned, it's either diversity and or differentiation. Maybe it's the same thing.
Variety, choice, differentiation of people, skills, all of that. Rich mix.
Density,
typology, ownership patterns, freehold, rental, whatever, community ownership, all comes into it. It's a difficult thing to do, because government tends to look for simple answers, very sort of stereotypical answers. With respect to them, that's how you roll things out.
To do it at scale at that national level.
The national government did it in Mitchell's Plain with the mass production of houses. It was their big, project, and they did it by mass housing, and it was all in the physical. It was badly positioned because they had to build a train line because the poor guys was...
Yeah, about that train line. That's another podcast.
So I think I hesitate to say the intention was good, but the what came out of it was this whole idea that we could create a product quickly. There was no process involved. We'd probably have to revisit processes and what products. I think there's a space for products, definitely, but there's a space for process as well.
You've talked about a couple of people, Roger and a number of the other folk who you said have inspired you. I mean, how important is it to have that inspirational individual or champion, a leading, I'm going to say in your instance, I look at you as a leading technical figurehead to vision and execute the job. How important is that in terms of getting the job done?
You know, what inspired me more, there wasn't any one person inspiring me, because I didn't really have anything to go to and say, I want to recreate that, other than 1 or 2, 3 visits to Latin America, and then observing our own condition and trying to sort of, what can we do? I think what inspired me a lot was the fact that people said, you're mad, you couldn't do it. And I think that
inspired.
Yeah, that was the inspiration and the motivation to get on with it and prove them wrong, basically. I mean, Clive and if I have to mention 2 people, Clive and Roger, provided the support and said, do it, go for it, and see what we can get out of it. It was more about proving people wrong.
I'm interested in some of the numbers. So how many projects, how many units do you think you have been able to put on the ground here in Port Elizabeth,
exactly
in spite of all of these challenges?
Yeah, well, I've put on the ground 3,556 units.
3,500?
Yeah, of which 1,676 are social housing units.
So almost half, so just about half of that.
Yeah, and for Misi, which is the social housing institution that runs them, we build it for them, and we package and assemble and get the funding from the SHA and from the Department of Human Settlements. Okay, now it's a consolidated capital grant, but it's still an allocation from the province and combined, and the National Housing Finance Corporation. We do all the applications for FLISP. We're not doing much in IRDP. I think there's enough has been done, enough, and I think we did what we could do. I think we proved what we could, and people just need to go on with it now. And so I've been 3,500 in the city.
Fantastic.
56 that have been directly involved in actually identifying, packaging, getting the funding, and being there through the implementation process until so I've kind of played developer and planner. And
you're an architect by trade, a man of...
No, I'm a town planner.
Town planner by trade, but you've played in the architect space, you've played in the social... You've been there and worn that T-shirt,
right? You've got to do it, You've got to be a jack of all trades. I mean, town planning is a bit like a jack of all trades and, sort of master of none. But it's funny, you're also... town planners are timid. And I don't know why, in doing all of this, they just want to do one thing. And, okay, for me it was different. I wanted to know about everything, and I wasn't scared to make a fool of myself at a project meeting on a site. It's the only way I learned. I've kind of in the beginning faked it a bit, as if I knew, but I knew nothing. So I go to these meetings and they're talking about, the principal agent is talking to the architect, and the architect's talking to the QS, and they're talking all sorts of jargon, that I don't know. But I learned very, very quickly. But I also wanted to say expectations. You've got to be honest with people. You can't gild the lily and say, I'm going to give you this, and you can only, and it's like this amazing thing that you're telling them. And especially in this market, you've got to be very, very direct.
Your approach has been to deliver and push the boundaries in each of these projects that you've moved on to. Increased densities, differentiated typologies, social housing, finance linked. You've used the full array. Why is it? The ability to replicate at scale and based on the lessons learned and your efforts.
Yeah, you see, I think scale requires other role players to come in, other commercial developers. And, it seems as if they're reluctant to get involved. And that is why the last thing we did at GM, well, it wasn't the last thing, but it was one of the last things, was to create a special purpose vehicle called the Home Market, which is registered as a private benefit organisation. It's actually a non-profit. And therein also lies a lesson, because you can, these things can work that way as well. They don't always have to have markups and be up to 20-30%. You can have a markup of 5%, and then still make it affordable. But quite apart from that, the association with government projects, I think scare people off. Commercial developers who I think should get more involved in specifically the FLISP part, that credit-linked side, are scared about the association with government. And is it claims? Are they going to get their claims in 30 days? A cash flow? They perceive it to be there to be an incredibly bureaucratic system. Before them, they put off before they start, and maybe it's just a perception. Maybe it isn't real, because we've had problems with the Department of Human Settlements in claims, but it hasn't been a total train smash. We've managed to, and we've had a good association with them for some time. So there has been this sort of private-public sector partnership element in it, and I think it can work, and it's worked for us. Private developers are just scared. They're scared of those. That association, and I've had a number of them sit here and they phone me and say, give us some advice on how we can get involved in social housing and FLISP. And then when I relate the story, you can just see the face sort of like
the blood drain.
Yeah, just drain, and you can see. And then right at the end they say, I think this is not for us. And then they're out of here. So, and I can understand why. I always encourage more to be involved. There's enough for everybody to do. There's more than enough. I can never understand, why people feel, and why we've got a shrinking construction industry. It's for me, there's so much to do out there, and there's so much opportunity. I can't do it on my own. We're only so much, so many. So I've always tried to involve others, whether they NGOs, NPOs, commercial, private developers, to be involved, and it's not. I also think, I've got a board that's of very, very experienced people. They're an aging board, and they're of that generation that are idealists like me. We're obsessed. You have to have courage and tenacity. It's not easy. Patience. You've got to focus all the time. Given the fact that you're going to have a lot of people telling you you're going to fail, you've really, really got to be focused. You've got to be thick-skinned. So it's not just the organisations. Who you have, who's behind it, who's the personality. You can't replicate personality. You're either thick-skinned or you're not. You're either dogged or you're not, because you have to be. There's so much stuff there. There's also the well-located cheap land. It also gives
or lack thereof.
Lack thereof. Well, people will be horrified if I mention expropriation without compensation, but I think there are strategically positioned places not owned by public, by the public in cities that, I wouldn't say without compensation, but certainly need to be expropriated with some compensation. I still believe in some compensation. And whereas, we're on the subject of expropriation, it seems to have a rural focus. It has an urban focus as well, and probably even stronger in the urban area than in the rural areas.
I think this is where the conversation has been lacking. It seems to become this rural. It's going to be fought out in the battlefield in the cities and towns of the country.
It's in the urban areas that it's going to make a huge difference, and it's going to take on a completely different shape. Hence, I wrote this. This whole, land invasion, and we can control land invasion. I'll give you a copy of that. That was the last thing I wrote.
For the listeners, this is a guideline to site service and settlement programs published by the General Motors South Africa Foundation. So there's a full document here, Lance, where you're going into some.
It's a really graphic document because we wanted to show practically, in a land invasion situation, how you can invade land formally and with and manageably, and how you can manage it as a local authority, as a community. So this was the last, and it's ironic that I went full circle from all of this back to this.
So you're not advocating for land invasion, do I hear you correctly, sir?
No, controlled, managed, and planned land invasion. So and in places that are strategic. I mean, you don't want to go to floodline places under floodlines and unsuitable.
But common sense.
But yeah, identify where this can take place ahead of time. We've done this before. I mean, Soweto-on-Sea was used as a model. 10,000 families were half of them were allocated sites and services in an adjacent area, and the shack material was moved, and they were in such a way that they could upscale later on and consolidate. So there are methods. We tend not to look at this as part of the housing solution spectrum. Funding procurement, that's all under this problem of getting scale and bureaucracy and.
Maybe one last thing on that issue, Lance. The finance institutions, the banks, the lenders.
Yes.
What has been your take on their enthusiasm or lack thereof in terms of this space?
I think initially they were. My experience with they were initially sceptical of it because again association with government and so on, and I remember quite distinctly the banking world didn't want to get involved in the credit linked or FLISP subsidy market because of the fact that they had this 8-year clause in
yes,
that you had to sell back to
clause.
So that was removed, and that then opened the way for banks to get involved. So there's a foreclosure, the banks get their share first, and then what's left goes to back to government, and that opened the way. So you could see banks' reluctance, but once we started, we've done 400 more,
FLISP.
400 FLISP.
You probably that's 400 of the 600 nationally that's been done.
It's
so
probably so, and we have. Can I mention first?
Please
National, ABSA, Standard, and there's a home loans. Nedbank's not there. Don't know why, but they have provided bonds and without a problem. I don't know of any foreclosures, in fact, because they would come. I would know about them
sure.
selling in there, and there've been secondary sales as well. People have on-sold, and they're allowed to, but then they won't be helped again ever again.
Understood.
So, but the banks have been they've assisted. They've come to the party with home loans and so on. And we're about to embark on our next one, which is a sectional title FLISP, which we haven't done before. So
does that even exist?
Doesn't exist.
You're making this up now.
No, it's true. I mean, we're doing a sectional title FLISP because we believed because the income bands have also been expanded. Let me just say, FLISP, in my mind, is a wonderful subsidy instrument. I think it's a great subsidy instrument because for what on average 20% of government input, they gear 80% private sector funding. Social housing is different.
Completely.
It's 80% and only 20%, although that debt funding part is kind of growing in percentage. Sure. But generally it's about 80% subsidy, restructuring capital grant top-up, and 20% from either from a debt funder. We use National Housing Finance Corporation, but Nedbank I think also play in the space. So that's only 20%. FLISP is a I don't know why more attention is not placed in FLISP.
Is it not because it's just too difficult and it's just too?
I don't think it's difficult. I think government has to share the pie amongst the instruments. I think the obligation is still to provide for the free basic house, and that consumes a lot of the fiscus.
That's back
social
to
housing is probably second in line, and then FLISP is, but they can do a hell of a lot of more with FLISP, given the fact that the subsidy is relatively small in relation to the total. Our average FLISP is about 45,000. Out of three RDP subsidies, we can do three out of one subsidy, so we can do 3 FLISP people and gear 3 banks that will provide 80%. So just on that score, I've had lots of discussions with Amity Vorder, who was, and I wrote things, long things about my experience, because the FLISP project we were doing at Walmer was a national housing pilot project.
Yeah.
So and we learned a lot out of that. The greatest thing I learned was, people pay. We were scared of foreclosures. We were scared of rent boycotts.
Those are natural.
We
natural
never
ways.
had, in the 4 or 5 years that we've been we're out of it now. I think we're down to our last 3 houses for sale, which is just an ongoing thing. We've never had any of those eventualities. So it's a great project, great subsidy.
I think it's a fantastic summary. I mean, and this idea that, as you say, one IRDP subsidy equals 3 FLISP. In my mind, it comes back to what is the deal? What is it we are offering? And I think this idea we need a range of products.
Yeah.
But where we say we're going to emphasise, and it seems to my mind that we're still emphasised in the one earth, one unit, and we're getting confused in, is it that or is it the site and service? At the meantime, social...
There's still site and service.
100%.
Then there's RDP. Then there's social housing, crew, whatever. I've never seen crew, but I mean it's the same as social housing basically. And then it's FLISP, and then it's you're on your own kind of thing. Those are the steps.
So that's the ladder. Which one are we emphasising at national? I think that's been the challenge for us.
Exactly, and
that has been the challenge.
It's very much that thing that speaks to the ladder, and I think it was good intent.
100%.
There was lots of good intent here. It's just that the priority, we need to clear where the greatest impact is happening.
Understood.
And of course, the whole idea of stable employment.
Big issues.
Those are big issues in social housing, because you have to prove that you can at least sustain a year's lease of rental. Certainly in FLISP, you've got to prove that you can sustain 20 years of repayment on a home loan. So it requires stable employment. It requires the economy to grow. It's wheels within wheels. It's all interrelated, and I don't think we're seeing that too much. I think the housing program itself creates work. I mean, we on an average social housing project of 400 units, of 400, have about 450 workers for 12 to 18 months on a project. So it's like a public works program as well. I think one of the main things, and I think the professor also alluded to this when I listened last night to that podcast, was the support across all sectors. You need institutional support. You need the sectors talking to each other. It's interdisciplinary. We don't have that at the moment. Housing doesn't really speak to environment, for example. You can be sitting with 18 months, 2 years with the National Environmental Management Act, trying to go through an environmental impact assessment that can drag on for 3 years. And it's fine, and I'm saying that, flippantly, it's fine that 5,000 families are living below floodline, ruining a wetland, but we've got to clear a piece of land that is virtually trashed for relocation, and we've got to go through a 4 year environmental process for that. It's madness.
Doesn't help.
It's total and insanity. So when I'm hearing leaders stand on platforms and saying, "Oh, we must fast track," start looking at the regulations and legislation, one of which is the National Environmental Management Act. I'm not saying you shouldn't have it,
Understood.
but it should be reformed. It should be so. That's just an example where the organs of state aren't talking to each other and saying.
And the legislation is not necessarily assisting all the time.
It's not aligned. It's not, and it doesn't. And in fact, can be used. And we've got a case in PE where we've been trying to do a social housing project for 10 years now, where the National Environmental Management Act has been used against us to endlessly get people who are objecting, that's the NIMBYs, objecting to us. And they can do it through the mechanisms and the regulations of the National Environmental Management Act and drag this thing out forever.
By
to
which
the
time
point
the
we
land,
were
the
so
land economists
frustrated, we just walk away from it, and
Yeah.
then they're pleased. So they can exclude integration through the very act that's meant to promote it. So it's an incongruous thing. So that's one place. I spoke about the political will and strong mature leadership. I
Very
won't go
much so.
there. Knowing the rules of the game, consumer education is important. The knowledge of the community, networking them. A lot of them are first-time home buyers or first-time property owners. They don't know the networks. They don't know what they maybe. They do know, some of them, but most of them don't. What is my obligation to pay rates? Why do I pay rates? There's so many things. Banks' involvement. Banks need to be educated in understanding the consumer, the very, very particular and unique consumer they have in first-time home buyers or people that are getting credit-linked subsidies, or even that person that's getting an RDP house, or the family that got a social housing unit. What is my obligation to pay rental? What is my, what happens if I don't pay rental? You've got to have support from the institutions. Eviction's not always a good thing, and I'll use that as an example. But, if you want a sustainable social housing industry, those rules need to be in place. I see now there's a rule that's coming in, or they're debating it, that if you evict somebody, you've got to find alternative accommodation for that person. Well, where did that person come from in the first place? And I think it's placing a huge burden on a social housing institution.
It's not their core business.
It's not their core business, and there again, interdepartmental cooperation is an important thing. Maybe site and service. There's a lot of developmental and socio-economic advantages to. The obvious one's been job creation. I've alluded to the amount of people that we employ, both in the construction, but also post construction. You have janitors and officials that have to run these things.
Security in Walmer
with better homes, better quality of life. I can say with complete conviction that I've only seen quality of life improve. In 99.99% of the people that have received either social housing or FLISP or even B&G free basic housing from us, and it has a huge spin-off. The real estate value, the asset value, you can borrow against it for things maybe like education, the obvious things, amenities that they have closer, and of course we have restructuring zones, and we have Any town planner knows the principles of town planning is to increasing the rate base of the city, creating, reconstructing the community basically from the putting Humpty Dumpty together again. I suppose that's the.
Well, we inherited in '94. It was broken, and
Sure,
we've had to rebuild this thing. And
one of my good friends said to me, Lance, we did Missionvale. This is not. I can now remember it so well. He said, you don't need to build houses. You've got to send a lot of psychologists in there because these are broken people. And I thought about that. I said, don't waste the money on the housing. Send people and reconstruct these people. They are, there's a lot of damage. And I remember that so well, and that was years ago. And, I'm very sort of solution orientated. I want to do things, and that was a completely different sort of idea. And then, you need peer support. You can't do it on your own. I mean, it's almost a trite thing to say. You do it with support, and you do it with peer support. You do it with teams that you can rely on, and you get those people together to understand that the dream may be with you. I mean, contractors, I had a contractor. Contractors are very hard people. It's just about the JBCC contract. See, I've learned. And all this stuff, and then right at the end they said, it's one of the first projects I've ever felt that I've actually contributed something as well, that I'm part of the building or the reconstruction process. I know that sounds like very airy-fairy. And I thought, cheapers, even if you change the mind of one person, it's really important. So it's had an effect on so many levels, so many people. So, it's been a great experience.
So it sounds like a proper journey, and that's what we wanted. That's what we wanted to try and reflect on today.
Yes.
I was basically wanting to close up by asking you where people can find out more about what you're doing.
Yeah, under GM, we obviously had websites, we had documents, we had stuff. We wrote stuff about our experiences. We were open to being interviewed. We were site visits.
We were beneficiaries of that.
We had workshops. We had almost focused workshops on aspects of housing. We've given lectures at university, and in fact, a lot of this material. I'll give a module on starting a social housing project, but from the implementation side, not from the management side.
Understood.
And what the components are, what the steps you need to go through, project management, all that. Around, we use social housing as a theme for the students here at the university who do housing. But it also it resided on websites, and it doesn't anymore. And what I want to say when I was thinking about this, your initiative is a flippin' great initiative to actually revisit, re-encapsulate, almost historically.
It's archive. It's archive material.
Yeah.
Not so, and it's there. It tells a story, and
gather it and keep it in a place. And I think it's a fantastic initiative that you're doing. And I hope people will learn from what I have to say, as much as I've learned from the two previous podcasters. Great deal that you reassess your objectives just by listening to what they're saying and say, that's an angle.
Hadn't thought about that for a while.
And that just reminds me again that. I can't remember what the professor said, but he said something about we do this before we do that. It was just a fundamental thing. I think he said we look at the disease before we recommend the medicine. I think he said it somewhere there, and it was such a simple thing for me to just. Yes, we do look at that first. And that did we look at it here? What were the symptoms that led to this? What were the symptoms? What did we look at here? So. I think there is still a website. We've got the permission from GM through the Home Market because it was a
IP as well.
Yes, and there is one, and they can find all of that also.
Fantastic.
On there. But I think your podcast is going to be great in encapsulating it all, and it's nice to hear from people. You can hear the motion. And I think that's important. It's just a dead old piece of writing. Yeah.
Well, what I think is going to be interesting, Lance, and I mean one of the tests for us in terms of the podcast and its effectiveness is what's the feedback we get. What are the things where people, and that's where through social media like the Twitter platform, which is not something I'm particularly familiar with.
Yes.
Is what do people say? Do they say, Lance del Monte's approach inspired me, or actually it's old school. We've moved on from there. It's I think that's.
And I'd like to hear that response.
And I think we're open in every sort of podcast that we're putting out. We once we got the platform up and going properly, I think that's where it's to stimulate debate, to recognise there will always be a 360 of opinions, 360 degrees of and sometimes we'll agree and sometimes we'll disagree. But can we agree there are conversations and as you say, an archive of material and processes that have led, in this instance, in your case, to tangible results on the ground. And I think when I'm sitting here listening to you, the fact that you say, everyone that you have engaged with, and I know from experience, having walked some of these sites with you, people know who you are. People in certain respect. Weren't you the mayor of Missionvale at one stage? And officially, the point. You say that you've yet to come across somebody who has not benefited from the approach. That is profound. That is truly profound.
Both people who on the receiving end, and when I say receiving end, have been part of the process and have received, and those that have been involved, and those that are looking in, saying, okay, what can I take from this? As much as I took from stuff in Brazil and further afield, it's a you've got to open your mind to it, and even if it's a little outdated, at least it sparks a debate.
In my mind, Lance, certainly you've earned your place in space as somebody who really has since
I think so,
1994
yeah.
completely changed the game,
Oh,
and
we
inspired certainly from my side, in my own personal career. You are the benchmark, and I mean
Sure.
that sincerely of what it is to make a difference, to, as you say, not be afraid, not feel that ridicule sometimes is the only, in this instance,
Yes.
medicine to get through, to get you going. So you said you've just hit 65. You're heading into the twilight years here, and at some stage you're going to have to think more about a quieter life, away from developing and being on boards and so forth, and social housing, etc. So away from this development world, do you have maybe a message? And I think there's so many messages you've already touched on, but for the professionals, the activists out there who
I think it's more about it becomes quite a personal thing. I think even though we say we've got people around us that support us, you know, it doesn't leave my head. It's a bit like tinnitus, you know. It's buzzing there all the time. It's constantly there. It's like a mistress, you know.
I would not know.
You can edit that.
I would not know, sir.
You can know. But I think what I said earlier on, don't listen to the naysayers. If you've got an idea and it's a realistic idea, you must just go for it. Believe in yourself. The usual things. Believe.
Basics.
Yeah, the basic stuff. Never shun advice and knowledge from others. No matter how old you are. I'm still learning, and I'm still wanting to learn. I'm still keen to sort of get opinion. That's why I'm quite interested to know what the response is going to be. Feedback is going to be here. Stay learning and innovating. I think that's I think for officials, I would say think about the consequences of your decisions when you're confronted with an application or a proposal that you may be the line function and there's a box you've got to tick, and you might not know that if you don't tick that box, you either delay or you destroy a project. Think about clearly, and officials tend not to. Think developmentally. We talk about a developmental state. We talk about a developmental local authority. Understand actually what that means. What does it mean? And you know what? We don't live in a perfect world. So even if the thing is not perfect, but it has, you know, for the old planning saying the greater good, you know, it has some element of the greater good.
Make it happen.
Make it happen. If it's not 100% there, but it's reached 85, 90%, make it happen. But understand the consequences of your decision, because even the most lowly official can have devastating results and consequences on really, really good projects. And I've been very, very close to projects of mine being scuppered by a junior that's, you know, insistent on, to the extent that I've had to go over. I mean, the other day I just walked into an office and I said, I want to see so-and-so, and they said, have you got an appointment? I said, no, but I'm not going away until I can see him. And then he'll see you in 10 minutes. And then I had the letter the next day. You know, a letter I've been wanting to get for two months.
And had you not gone? Had you not gone on that day? You would still be waiting for it.
I would still be waiting for it. So, and don't be afraid to do that. You know, because I believed so much in the project. I wasn't going to let the project go down for the small, thing. I think it sounds complex, but it's also easier than you think. Just think logically, and I mean, I'm different. I'm a different person to what I was when I started years ago. I'm a little calmer about things. Maybe I've got less to lose. Maybe I'm coming to the end, so I'm relaxed about it, and it's a nice place to be. A little bit more relaxed. I'm worried, obviously, about certain things, and particularly the state of our cities, and particularly our city that is being badly run. I live in the city, and that's another thing. Don't think you're not a citizen of the city you're making decisions in. You are
absolutely
also in that city. So if you're making a bad decision, it's going to come back to you as well. Not just, you know, you're not isolated. You're not sitting in a glass.
There's a consequence for the city, and there's a consequence from the citizen side.
Yeah, talk to one another. You know, and again, this is a conversation that we should have. I love the blog idea. I think it's a great idea that will I hope the conversation going. It ain't over yet.
I'm really glad to hear there's more to come.
No,
Your next project, the name of it?
I'm starting. In fact, on Monday I've got a meeting with a contractor for the construction of another 385 units in Mutenag. It's a multi-story social housing
Fantastic.
unit. I'm busy with 140 FLISP houses in sectional title.
That was the sectional title one you
and
talked
then
about?
we've got a whole 61 hectares that we're busy looking at. And then, funny enough, we've got stuff in the Southern Cape, Plettenberg Bay. We're looking at a place called Kranshoek, where we've got a FLISP and a social housing project. We're trying to start something in the Southern Cape. There seems to be a lack of interest on the Cape Town side, so we thought, okay, well, from the PE side, we're 2 hours away, and I think that's the problem, is the distance. We've got an affordable, whatever that may mean, an affordable retirement village we're looking at. Well, you see,
how do we get in?
I think they're also in Plet. It's in a place called Witterdrift. It's a small little town just off, attractive little town. Not quite as cutesy as Greyton, but certainly, it's within easy reach of Plet. It's a very nice area for retirees. It's tranquil.
Sure.
Not at the moment with the stuff happening on the national
Hopefully
road.
we can get home tomorrow.
But that'll pass. It's Friday, so I think we'll get some peace over the weekend, hopefully. So, yeah.
Lance, I can't thank you enough. You've got the weekend ahead of you,
Pleasure.
and I really appreciate the time. You certainly, every time I've come knocking at your door for advice or for time over the past 15 years or more, you've always given it to me. Thank you for this. I suspect we're going to be looking at a number of podcasts. We've got a lot of material here,
Well,
and it's going to be a
with
testimonial that you can, hopefully you can come back to when times are tough, and certainly for colleagues who have always said, there's a man in PE you need to go and speak to. And now if they can't get to you,
I wear that with dignity and respect from you. I mean, it really. It's from the outside.
It's fantastic. I can't wait for people to hear this. It's going to be very, very exciting for me personally. Lance, enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
Get involved, get informed, and most importantly, get subscribed. You can find us on our Twitter feed at Talking Transfo and the number 1. That's Talking Transfo 1. Talking Transformations music kindly supplied by Tribal Need. Find them at tribalneed.com.